Commission will now come to order. Please rise and follow Commissioner Spathos in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
Right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the Secretary please call roll?
Commissioner Owens,
Present.
Commissioner Fermetta,
Present.
Commissioner Spathos,
Present.
Vice Chair Duarte,
Present.
and Chair Dominguez.
Present. Will those in the audience please read the cover page of the agenda as it outlines the procedures for which the Commission will follow. This is a time set aside for oral communications for the Planning Commission. Does any Commissioner wish to express an announcement or report on a conference or a meeting or request items for future agenda? Commissioner Spathos,
None, thank you.
Commissioner Frometta,
I have none, thank you.
former Chairman Owens,
None, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Vice Chairman Doherty,
None.
and neither do I. Is the Commissioner of Community Development aware of any presentations for tonight?
Yes, Chairman Dominguez. We have a presentation regarding residential development standards, and to provide some background on that topic's more affectionately known as our mansionization study. And that's a direct result of the development activity that we've observed and approved and disapproved here at the Planning Commission. Goes back specifically to the lot splits that have been presented to the Planning Commission. The most recent ones were on 3rd Street and then another one on Morning Avenue. The lot split that was denied on the northwest corner of 3rd and Reeves was the specific one that triggered this topic. Based on that activity, the staff recommended to the City Council that we establish a moratorium on lot splits. Moratoriums work in a way that you have the ability to establish an urgency ordinance where the moratorium goes into effect immediately for 45 days, and then you come back a second time and you extend it for 10 months and 15 days. Well, when staff came back the second time to City Council to extend that moratorium on the lot splits, the council had a deep conversation on what was the true issue. Was it the lot splitting, or was it the size of the residential product that was being placed on lots? They ultimately decided that it was the size of the product of those residential developments that was the real challenge, hence the term mansionization that's tossed around in this industry. And so council directed staff to procure the services of a subject matter expert to delve into the issue. And so staff conducted a solicitation. We ultimately hired John Kaliski Architects. They're an urban planning design group that are involved in a lot of these matters in specific cities in this region to delve into a study in terms of what are our residential design standards and what do they yield, and what do we need to look at if we wanted to go in a certain direction. And what they've done with staff's assistant is conduct 2 different community meetings to solicit feedback. They've put together the information that they've collected from the community. They've incorporated their thoughts and opinions in those of staff. And our next milestone is tonight, is to present that information to this body. And it's for informational purposes only. Our goal is now to collect your feedback in terms of what you've seen, what you've read, what you may have heard in the community. And then what we're going to do is we're going to collapse your feedback into our ongoing study and go back out to the community for a 3rd time. We've been out there twice. And we're going to let them know what we've heard from them, what we've heard from the Planning Commission, and then once again solicit final feedback from the community. We'll then come back to the Planning Commission. We're thinking, February, March, and propose an ordinance based on everything that we've heard. This is how we believe the residential design standards should be changed and or implemented. There may be a lot of new things that we implement. There may be some things that we take away, modifications and so forth. There'll be a discussion at the Planning Commission, may take a meeting or 2, and then ultimately we'll head to the City Council and request a zone change and or amendment to our design standards, or incorporating design standards into our zoning code. So that's in a nutshell what the process is. Tonight, John and his team are going to provide you a presentation, solicit your feedback. I think they might even put you through an exercise similar to what the community went through, and we'll go from there. So with that, if we can call up John and or his team, whoever's going to present.
I'm just waiting until the chairman is ready. Okay.
Before we proceed, I just wanted to explain just a procedural issue. On the special meeting agenda, there is a general public comment period for agenda items. We're not going to follow that. We're going to take, after the residential development standards presentation, we will ask for public comment then. And then when we jump into our public hearing, we'll take public comment when the hearing is open. And for the conditional use permit and for the zone text amendment, we'll ask for public comment for each of those items. And then we'll jump into the non-agenda public comment period, which is towards the end before the consent calendar. So we won't be taking public comment on all the agenda items all at once. We're going to be taking public comment for each item. Okay, so the chairman has skipped that item on the agenda, and we're going to go into this discussion of residential development standards, and then we'll ask for public comment after the questions have all gotten answered by the presenter and the commission.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I'm John Kaliski. I'm here tonight with Ariel, which is up in Los Angeles, and we're happy to be making this presentation of the considerations and draft recommendations that have been developed over the past, I guess, almost a year since we started. And I'm also pleased that there are people in the audience that I recognize from a couple of the community meetings and interesting process. So what we're going to do tonight is, as Aldo said, the thinking that we've developed, give you a taste of the type of exercise we did with the community, and then describe some of the ideas that we have been working on with staff that would ultimately be brought forward to you after your comments and the community's comments as some type of potential evolution of your current zoning code to address some of the issues that exist within the community. Do you want to hit the next slide, Ariel? I'm not using a thing tonight because the technology that we're using tonight is a little bit awkward, and so we're going to have to bear with us a bit. Okay, I think we've had the introduction. So we're going to talk about our work to date. We're going to talk about the survey exercise that we did with the community and give you a taste of that. We're going to then talk about some of the draft recommendations, the highlights. In fact, we have a lot more draft recommendations, but we didn't want to get too much into the weeds, so we've tried to isolate out the 9 or so that are key. And then we're going to very much look forward to your comments and the discussion and the directions that you provide. You want to hit the next one? Okay, we've already done this introduction. I'll just point out that our office, we're urban designers and architects. We also have an association in this project with MIG, who are planners. That's really only in case we get into some issues having to do with environmental review. You want to hit the next one? Okay, so what have we done to date? Well, we had a kickoff meeting, as I said, a little over a year ago, a year and 3 months, with staff. We then basically, both with staff and on our own, went out and took a look at all of your R1 neighborhoods, which are quite extensive within the city of Downey. City of Downey, more so than a lot of communities, an R1 community, tremendous amount of single-family residential communities. And we studied those. We then basically spent some time really consolidating our study and our research and everything. We presented that in the form of kind of a report, if you will, to staff in terms of what do we see in terms of residential character in Downey? What do we see in terms of style? What do we see in terms of zoning? I think the key for us was to try to understand it in the context of the issues that were being raised within the community and to you folks specifically. We then basically, initially we're going to only do one community meeting. We did that first community meeting, which we called the listening workshop, and based upon that first meeting, we decided that we wanted, with staff, to deepen our engagement in the community, so we did a second meeting to try to make sure that we had done our best to reach out, notify as many people as possible, give people different times to come and participate. We then took all of that information, we developed a report about what we heard at the community meetings, which I'll describe a bit tonight, and then we went starting last year about at this time through February, and we developed a first round of recommendations. And for various reasons, it took us a little bit longer than we wanted to get back here tonight. But starting about 2 months ago, we finally were able to get this meeting scheduled, which is in essence our study session and our direction session. And we've brought all of that work to you tonight. So this is November 6th, and I think, there you go. Something just happened with our computer, but I think it's all working. Are we free to proceed, or do we need to pause for a moment? Okay, do we I'm happy to do whatever. Okay, sure. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Ariel. Okay, let me describe some of the work to date briefly. Can you hit the next one? Basically, as I said, all of those colored areas are your R1 neighborhoods, the result of, let's see, this is 2019, let's call it 2020, starting in about 1920 to the present, actually starting a little bit sooner than that, but with really a tremendous amount of development in the 50s and 60s. You want to hit the next one? Basically, 86% of your housing stock at this point is more than 30 years old, which may explain why a lot of people at this moment in time are investing money. It's also a good economy, obviously. About 65% of your housing stock was built as single-family detached dwelling units, and that's really, in some ways, the identity of Downey and very important to the way the city sees itself and the community sees themselves. There are about 35,000 dwelling units in the city, and it's fairly stable in terms of the amount of growth that continues to occur, particularly with regard to the single-family housing. So what you see is people fixing houses up, adding on to houses, and then there are these remnant parcels for some interesting historical reasons that there are opportunities to subdivide them, and those have been the subject of some controversy at times that I know that you've had to deal with. You want to hit the next one? There's a great variety of sizes that we see when we do an analysis. The smallest site we were able to identify that's a so-called R1 site is 25 feet wide and 82 feet long. The largest one is over an acre. It's actually close to an acre and a half that's sort of sitting out there. There could be some other ones that we didn't quite catch. We did a GIS analytic of what the median lot size is in the city of Downey, and it comes out to 6,750 square feet or so, 110 to 130 feet deep by about 50 to 60 feet wide. And the reason that's important is that a lot of the time in these exercises, we spend a tremendous amount of energy dealing with what are basically the outlier properties, whereas the vast majority properties are basically there in the center. And so for us as kind of policy wonks who look at this stuff, in some ways we're designing towards the median, but we are having a lot of conversations oftentimes about the extremes. And it's just something to keep in mind as we go through these types of exercises. Do you want to hit the next one? And there you can see between 5,000 and 6,000 square feet, that and 7,500 square feet, that's over 50% of the properties. The ones that are really big are less than 1%. The ones that are really small are in the 2%. So that's your bell curve, and that's in some ways the challenge when you do this type of an exercise. You want to hit the next one? Where you have tracks, a lot of the lots are uniform. And a lot of the time, some of the conversation that comes up has to do with the fact that people who live in some of these communities see what they may not think of quantitatively, but in fact are changes to the community that don't really match the uniform patterns. And that sometimes creates a certain amount of angst. On the other hand, as you move up and down the streets, there are cases where all of a sudden you have non-uniform lots. There are places where you have varied lots, and then there are these so-called subdividable lots, which, interestingly enough, from what we can tell, are the result of Downey having been developed in the 50s and 60s, where people who owned larger parcels of land sold them off but kept holdings for themselves, so that basically you would get subdivisions created with remnant larger parcels sitting within them, which over time basically, through economic cycles, individuals sell them off and they become subject to subdivision, or people hold on to them and they become subject to subdivision. And a lot of the challenges from what we can tell that you've faced have to do with those, but meanwhile, 60% or so of the lots are just this kind of uniform pattern, and they're going along their merry way and establishing the identity and character of the city. Do you want to hit the next one? You have a zoning code that tries to distinguish between all of these lots and does break it down by lot size, but you'll notice applies it applies a uniform FAR or floor area ratio, or what's the amount of development that you're allowed to build across the entire spectrum of lot sizes that you have. So what this diagram is basically showing is two different things. One is you have what's called a zoning envelope, meaning you have side yards, rear yards, and a maximum height. And the second one is that you have a density quotient, which allows you to build a maximum 0.6 house. So on a 3,000 square foot lot, that would work out to be 3,000 times 0.6, which is, I can't do the math in my head. Who can do that math? Do I have to get out my 0.1 of, it's 300 times 6, 1,800 square feet. So if you owned a 3,000 square foot, that particular lot there, you would be able to build an 1,800 square foot lot. On the other hand, here at the bottom, you'd be able to build on that 15,000 square foot lot a 9,000 square foot lot house. And if it was a two-story house, what you can basically see is that the zoning envelope ends up being much larger than the amount of FAR that you're allowed to achieve. And the thing that's important about that is that what it means is that there's a lot of potential to manipulate that zoning envelope to effectuate changes to mass and bulk without necessarily fooling around too much with the amount of area that people are allowed to build. You can also see that if you keep things uniform and you apply the same rules to every single lot in the entire city, changes to, say, height, side yards, rear yards, front yards, step backs, et cetera, are going to affect the smaller sites much more so than they're going to affect the larger sites. And that's where those outlier comments become really interesting to consider. You want to hit the next one? When we look at some of the surrounding communities that, from our work with staff, we think that folks in Downey look at as in some way being comparable or competitive, or maybe where they wouldn't want to live or where they do want to live, because Downey actually has a very high quality of lifestyle in its residential neighborhoods. What you can see is that with the only exception being Cerritos, most of the surrounding communities, Whittier, La Mirada, Fullerton, Anaheim, Lakewood, have lower FARs than the city of Downey. So if one was to sort of ask in a gross way, why do we perceive that houses that are being built in Downey somehow are big? Maybe part of it is that with the exception of Cerritos, in the surrounding communities, you don't get as much of an allowance in terms of the amount of bigness that you're allowed to build. And so I don't think that FAR is the only criteria that one should look at. That's why we have more than one recommendation. But it's a consideration to know that within your community, you're giving people an opportunity to build more than in some of the surrounding communities, which we think some people feel are comparable. Do you want to go to the next one? In terms of lot coverage, Downey doesn't really regulate lot coverage on the ground floor, but it does regulate lot coverage on second stories as a percentage of the first story. But some of your neighbors in some of your surrounding communities also limit the amount of lot coverage that can be achieved. So like if you own, say, a 5,000 square foot lot and it says you can only build 50%, it means that you couldn't cover more than 2,500 square feet of your lot. So in some ways, if you think of like architecture as a toothpaste tube, you can kind of squeeze more of the toothpaste out in Downey on a first level than you might be able to do in some of the surrounding communities. And that's both a good thing and it's also, in some cases, a problematic thing, depending upon exactly what project you're looking at. You want to hit the next one? In terms of height, Downey's actually a little bit more restrictive than the surrounding communities, with the exception of Fullerton, which pushes the height down more. So you're at 28 feet maximum height. In Fullerton, the first story can be a maximum of 20 feet. If you have 2 stories, it's a maximum of 30 feet. So it's both more restrictive and less restrictive depending upon how you're trying to play the design game. You want to hit the next one? Okay. So that's kind of your, let's say, gross overview of what your zoning is doing to you. And then you get this aspect of Downey which is really fascinating, which is the whole issue of character. And that, for us, gets into the issue of what are we really talking about? Are we talking about the need for more robust design guidelines, which are shoulds and some means for staff to be able to work with people who want to do projects in a more robust way? Or that could be expanded into, more formalized design review processes. Or are we talking about, the metrics of building? Like how many square feet do you get? How high can it get? What type of setbacks? And we tried to look at both of those. So in terms of the character, well, you have some really lovely historic homes that go back to really kind of pre-incorporation era, the Reeves Mansion, which is fantastic. I hope that you can get in now, though for some reason the picture says keep out. The original farmhouse style, in the 1920s, you got some of the classic period style homes. There are good representative examples of that in Downey, like the Casa de Parley Johnson House. But these, at this point in time, in some ways are kind of the exceptions to the rule of what we see in Downey. You want to hit the next one? Because after World War II, Downey was basically squarely in the target of where growth occurred in that sort of burgeoning era of suburban growth. And you had a tremendous amount of tract housing built and neighborhoods built. And those followed the sort of typical types of house styles of the day. And they were built in great quantities starting in the mid-1930s. And really you had a fairly limited number of styles that you see over and over and over again. So starting in the 1930s through the 1950s, there's a lot of what are technically called minimal traditional homes. They're kind of like a 1930s, 1940s version of colonial housing. They've got low-pitched roofs. They kind of have vaguely colonial details in them. You see them everywhere in Southern California, from Lakewood to Panorama City and Downey. A lot of the time, most of the time, the garage is at the rear. They're one-story houses. They have a small amount of ornament. They often have just one material. Sometimes they have a second decorative material. And this was basically workers' housing. And there were a lot of people who were workers in Downey working in the factories around here, and it was the middle-class lifestyle and the latter lifestyle that, in some ways, Downey exemplified more than most communities. You want to hit the next one? As the community became a little bit wealthier and as the country became a little bit wealthier, you started to see the expansion of those houses into what are called ranches and ranchettes, again, predominantly one story. They kind of reflect the increased prosperity and kind of a little bit of nostalgia for maybe that lost ranch style that maybe once existed but was going away. So they were kind of a metaphor for something that no longer existed or was going away. The roof pitches still tend to be low. The houses tend to be a bit asymmetrical. In some of the subdivisions, the lots become a little bit wider. Interestingly enough, in the beginning of this era, you saw the garages tucked behind, and as it evolves into the 60s and 70s, you increasingly see examples where the garages start moving to the front. But what's fascinating is that most of your blocks are fairly consistent or prevailing either one way or the other way. So one of the interesting things for us is that, you know, sometimes you hear people say, oh, it would be so great if all the garages were in the rear, because when that first, you know, house comes on the block that puts the garage in front, that's really somehow problematic in terms of the character of the neighborhood. On the other hand, you could go the opposite direction and say, well, wait a second, there are blocks where almost every single house has the garage up front. So that becomes a little bit of a challenge when you're writing a zoning code or interpreting a zoning code. You want to hit the next one? As it evolves, as I said, in some ways, again, in some ways you could say you keep having increasing prosperity in Southern California, and it's reflected in the architecture. And the houses become a little bit larger. There are more styles. So this ranch house evolves into a whole variety of different styles, from Tudor to French to American colonial to Spanish. And it's hard to really, I mean, what was fascinating to us at the community meetings, we had people come up to us and say, you know, some of these neighborhoods that were built in the 60s are really historic at this point. And, you know, what do you think about that? And we'd say, it's amazing when you drive through some of these communities in Downey how the character really has been maintained at a very high level for 50, 60 years at this point. And so again, that may be a reason why when you start seeing change, people building two-story houses or adding a second story to one of these houses, that people get kind of, some people get agitated because they see something of real quality that's being, from their perspective, lost. Do you want to hit the next one? And then you have even larger houses, a lot of which are 2 stories. Oftentimes the garages now are often to the front, where you could describe it as new traditional from 1975 to the present. And you see it in all sorts of different styles. So this one, you have one that's kind of vaguely colonial on the bottom, one that's kind of vaguely Regency style at the top, and you see excellent examples of all of these throughout the city. And this overlaps with what is now happening, which is called Millennium Mansion, which you want to hit the next one. And this is where we get into sort of the complexity of the present, because we start seeing examples of houses where, again, increasing prosperity, Downey more and more being in the middle of where people want to locate, and people want to build their dream homes, and they build based upon a set of value systems that exist right now, and they build larger houses. They're even more fancifully decorated in some cases. They become even more of a contrast to that prevailing tradition, and they also start to represent traditions that come from the groups that are moving into Downey. You know, all the various different groups, they bring their traditions with them. So, you know, in the past we were talking about sort of the period styles. You know, the funny thing about period styles is they're kind of an expression of typical ways that the dominant populations that existed in the 1950s and 60s, or more, even more so in the 30s, thought about their constructed past. And now we have whole new generations of people who are coming, partaking in the American dream, and they're bringing their traditions to it. And you have a very, very interesting conversation, not only in Downey, but in Beverly Hills, in Burbank, in Los Angeles, about how do we accommodate all of this and do it in a way that, you know, we have a positive and constructive conversation. And there are good examples of this, and there are examples of this which, you know, aren't so wonderful. You want to hit the next one? And then you even now, within the last, say, 10 years, have a whole new generation of younger people who are in their 30s, who basically, for them, the cat's meow is mid-century modern. And you start seeing examples of that built both in individual cases where people hire architects, and then sometimes you see it in the form of kind of what I would describe as the house flipper phenomenon. Developers who come in from the outside who have no intention of living in the house, and they build what they perceive the market wants right now, which is, I'm selling to someone who's 25 to 45 years old. They're young, they're prosperous, they're having family, they want as much space as possible, they want all these amenities, they want the biggest backyard possible, they're interested in this type of modern aesthetic, and of course, the person who buys that house probably loves it, and it may be that the person who lives next door to it feels like their neighborhood has been assaulted. So, what do you do? Okay, you want to hit the next one. So, we did all of this work. We worked with your good director, Aldo, and your staff, and we said, okay, how do we have a conversation about these things? Because in some ways, what we're trying to get to the bottom of is this a conversation about people want more uniform character in their neighborhoods, or do people really want genuine standard reform in the form of smaller houses and stuff? So what we did was we developed a 20-image interactive survey, and we basically asked people to just tell us what they thought about the different images. And sometimes we heard really fascinating things that we absolutely didn't expect to hear, and other times it confirmed maybe what our own personal biases were going in. And what we wanted to do was to give you a flavor of what it was like to go through that exercise. And at various times I was told, present all 20 slides to the commissioners so that they have to go through the same exercise. I wanted to only give you 4 slides. I think we compromised at 8. And if at any point in time you want to just skip it and say, just get to tell us what the community said, we'll do it even faster. But I think we wanted to do it. So you've got these clickers in front of you. You should. And let me just describe what we're going to do. You're going to see a slide. Go to the next one. You have a clicker, which hopefully is on, and it should have some type of a AA or something like that on, and you can see it. And you've got a thing that says A, B, C, D, E. And basically, we're only using A, B, and C. We're only going to ask you to comment anonymously, of course, as to whether you like the image, dislike the image, or you're neutral on the image, right? And then I'm going to sit here and say, when we see the results, because we're going to see the results in real time of how the 5 of you are thinking. It may be that all of you, which in true Planning Commission style would be correct, will vote the same way every single time. It's rare that planning commissions are split. They try not to be, but sometimes it happens. Or we're going to see on the screen that you have completely differing opinions. And that's where it will be interesting to just ask you the question, well, who liked it, who didn't like it, and why do you like it or why do you not like it? And I don't think a lot of the time, and I say this over and over again, there's not really a right answer or a wrong answer. Our intention of presenting this to the community folks was to have a conversation with them. And in the course of hearing how the conversation worked, to hear the types of key words that we heard from them, to hear the type, it was sort of like by hearing the conversation, we could get a better sense of what people were thinking about. But the other thing that was really interesting for me is that a lot of the time in these conversations, people who like things don't really get opportunities to say why they like it versus people, and they don't get to hear why the people who don't like it. So part of what we were trying to do also was to just see what the dynamic was between folks who felt positive about something versus folks who weren't as positive about it. Okay, you want to hit the next one? So we're also going to tell you after you vote how the community voted on these particular 8 slides. And in our report, which we gave to staff, you could go through the whole thing and see all 20 if you wanted to. Okay, so are you ready? You have to hold up your little clicker. Be prepared. Let's go to the first one. Okay, so here's a view, whoops. Yeah, here's a view from that's interesting. Okay, we're on now. Okay, so you can vote anytime you want. Do we have to change the slide, or did you already do it? Meaning change the presentation so that we can see the results. Oh, that's right, okay. So here's a slide. This is a house. We're looking at a house. It's on Gallatin Schoolhouse Road. You have an opportunity to say you like it, you dislike it, or you're neutral about it. And have you all made an opinion? Okay, we'll close the voting after 30 seconds, and we'll show you what happened. Okay, so here's a case where all of you in good Planning Commission style basically said that you were uncomfortable with this. So my question to you is, it's easy to be uncomfortable, but can you articulate, can any of you say what it is that kind of makes you feel that this is not something that you feel comfortable with in terms of, and again, going back to the objective of the exercise, evolving Downey character and single-family neighborhoods in a way that is positive for its future and as well as maintaining its existing values. Does anyone want to comment?
I'll comment, since nobody's commenting. I actually know that house, and it looks much better in person than it does on a photo.
Blame the photographer.
Yeah. But I think in this case, from my perspective, it's very hodgepodge. So you have different time frames coming together to this house, and it doesn't really do it justice. It actually looks much nicer in person when you see it, and it's basically a box, ornamental balconies, and an overhang front porch area that is supposed to somehow be ornamental with, 40-foot Grecian style columns in the front. So you have everything together trying to mix into one, and it doesn't come together well, at least in the photo.
Okay. Anyone else want to sort of take a crack at it?
Sure. Although we can see the house to the left, which is similar in its size or sight line, the house to the right, this house that we're talking about is intrusive or intruding from the look in the picture to the house on the right, which is where I make exception.
So the notion of intrusion is an interesting one to me. So what specifically intrudes from your perspective?
Although we can't see the different elevations, we see the front only. I'm expecting there's some side windows that may be looking into the yard or into the other residence.
So it's the side yard issue, the looming of that one house over the other house along a side yard.
Yes.
Okay. Any last comment? Because we don't think it's fair to make every single one of you, just in case you're really desiring. Okay. We also didn't bring our comment box, and that's one of the things I wanted to say. We know that not everybody likes making public comments, so we also had cards and everything like that so that people who just wanted to write something could write it without necessarily having to stand up in public and tell us. You want to go to the next one? So this is I think this would technically be called a Millennium Mansion. And everyone feel comfortable that you have, we didn't present what people in the community said about that house. We have it for this one, okay. Okay, let's see what people said. Okay, now this is really interesting to me because we have one of the commissioners is neutral about this house, and I think that's the most fascinating thing, which if that commissioner feels comfortable telling us why they're neutral as opposed to
I'll tell you because I was neutral. I think it's somebody has a very good concept of what a nice home should look like, and it's barely trying to get there. It's just not getting there. So I think whoever designed it had a good idea, just didn't put it down right on paper and eventually build it to where it would reflect what the idea was. But I think he's getting there.
Well, I think that what's fascinating about your comment is if you compare it to your comment about the previous one, you used the word hodgepodge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of what you're getting at is the notion of how well is the craft of the house executed. Because on the first one, it's not executed. Like there are ideas there, and those folks are making an effort, they are doing something. There are similar ideas here, but they're actually executing it a little bit better in terms of the consistency of the language and everything. And this is purely from, like, say, John Kaliski, he's like looks at architecture for 50 years or something, and I can see that. I think recognize that what you're getting at is that if this became what you really wanted to somehow wrestle with in the city of Downey, it's a design guideline issue and a design guideline process issue, because whereas the commissioner, I forget which commissioner, it was Mr. Owens who I think talked on the previous one. Who was the one who talked about the looming over one? It was you, okay. That's potentially a design standards issue, which is, should we manipulate our side yard setbacks or our second story setbacks in a way that somehow begins to mitigate that so that we don't end up having a conversation, it's just there's a regulation. So it's two different things that you're both driving at when you look at this. Okay, does anyone want to say why they didn't like this one?
I'll say, I think it comes down to just execution in terms of, where the gate is, how far it's set back. I think the lumen issue and just the side setbacks are kind of, takes up the entire lot. So I think this one and the other one come down to execution for me.
Okay. And my philosophy is that execution is design guidelines more than it is design standards. I mean, there are certain things that you put in a building code about execution, like you have to have so many nails or you can't use certain materials. But when you get down to what is a well-executed Corinthian column versus a poorly executed Doric column, we're in a pretty esoteric conversation in some ways. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so this is what we heard on this. Interestingly enough, there were a couple of people, there weren't that many people at the meetings, so I don't know what the absolute numbers were here, but there were some people who said they liked this house, and they actually liked it because their opinion of it was that it was executed well. There were a couple of people who were neutral in the same way Commissioner Spathopoulos is. They said very similar things, but the majority of people didn't like this house again. And we heard comments about it seemed too large. It seemed like it was getting too big in relationship to its neighbors, particularly. Okay, you want to go to the next one? Okay, so this is the second round. I guess we have 2 slides for each of the 4 rounds, right? Okay, good. So here we are. I think we've turned on the voting again, so you have an opportunity to say yay or nay. I love the folk back here who's saying they like it, so you're getting encouraged. It's sort of like being at a Rolling Stones concert. So Pangbourne Avenue, do we want to see what everybody said? Okay, now this is the most fascinating example to me of all, because we have 2 of you who like it, 2 of you who dislike it, and 1 of you who's neutral. And this to me is really the heart of what the challenge is for us as designers, planners, and architects, which is how do we sort of like work this? So what I would basically say is, someone who likes this, tell us why they like it.
I voted like on this. I like it because it fits. Again, in contrast to right or left, it seems to fit right in.
So there's a sense of scale that seems consistent to you.
And nice and neat.
Yeah.
The house to the right, house to the left look as neat as this one.
Okay. Someone who dislikes this, can they say why they disliked it? Is there a specific aspect of it that drove you nuts? And you're free not to say anything. You can say, I take the fifth on this.
I said that I didn't like it, and I think because of the entrance
Okay.
on the main door being so high and matching with the other 2 pitches, it just kind of looked off.
Okay, so that's really fascinating to me that you're able to identify and zero in on a very specific element which doesn't seem to fit the larger thing that you're looking at.
Well, and it was interesting, the slide before we had mentioned side yards. This is probably built out on the lot the same as the other home, the difference being this is single story, smaller home, smaller lot.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's more of a side yard thing. I think you mentioned something interesting, which was design standard versus guideline. That I think is key on this and the previous house. Very similar homes, setback, lot usage, everything. It's just design and how it comes to fruition when it's built and you see it either in person or on a photo.
So one of you was neutral. Do you want to describe the basis of your neutrality?
That would be me.
Okay.
The house is not, I didn't think it's ugly. I don't think it's beautiful. I agree, it does fit in the area. I don't care for the garage to be so close to the street.
Uh-huh.
Up front, in the front of the house, it takes half of the facade of the house. The long shaped, it looks like almost like a miniature mansion type entrance. Very well kept, beautiful. The appearance is very well taken care of home. So that I liked. So I'm very neutral with it. It looks like it fits. I can't see the rest of the house in the area, but I didn't have an issue, like a major issue with the home.
Well, there's clearly pride of ownership in this house.
There is.
There's no doubt at all. And I also think that, again, Commissioner Spathopoulos' comment, he zeroed in on the element that's actually the newer element in the house, which is the entry. Because there's no way that entry would have ever been designed and or executed in, say, 1958 or whenever that house was built.
Correct.
Somebody probably with a great sense of love said, I want to have an entry that makes me feel really proud.
Right.
And they did it. But you know what? That proud entry has come up in a gazillion communities all across Southern California and the rest of the nation. And some people think it's a great thing, and a lot of people think it's somehow excessive. And people have zeroed in on it in a lot of communities. Okay, before I go to the next one, you've gotten the flavor of what the exercise is. I'm happy to keep going, but I don't want to I don't want to wear out my welcome because I know we have recommendations. If you feel satisfied that you want to keep going, let me know. If you want us to just push forward, we will. Keep going?
Keep going. Yeah.
Push forward. Okay. I have to take the chairman's directive. Okay, so why don't we, before you push forward too much, let me just go really quick through the ones that we have where the community comments were, just so that you can see them. Okay, so this gets right to the point that Commissioner Fermetta was talking about. Residents, when we talked to them, consistently disliked houses built to the minimum side yard setbacks. And interestingly enough, when it was a second story, that was where it really got expressed more than when it was the first story. Do you want to hit the next one? Just go to the... People constantly liked houses that were well maintained. There were examples of houses that we presented which from our narrow bias we thought would be surely hated, but because they were really well maintained, people liked them. And so that's another complexity in this whole exercise, is pride of ownership when it's expressed in terms of a beautifully kept garden and things like that can overcome, conversations about aesthetic differences or even second stories sometime. People did say, though, that they really liked the architectural styles that exist in Downey, the minimal traditional, the ranch, etc. So that's something to think about. Want to hit the next one that's a community comment? Okay, the subdivisions. There were a lot of comments about the subdivisions in the meetings that we went to. I think when we got underneath of it, it had to do with an issue I mentioned earlier before, which was that a lot of the time when the subdivisions happen, there's something that people zero in on about incompatibility between the fit of how all the other houses work versus the standards that these houses operate. And we can talk more about this. Some of it has to do with that the roadway standards that your fire department imposes on them are a little bit different because they're private roads than the public roads. Some of it has to do with lot sizes and the way lot sizes are calculated. But there is a certain tension that exists there, and trying to figure out how to deal with that is complicated. You want to hit the next one? So what were the overall community concerns? And these are actually, there were, what is that, 7, is that right? 1, 2, 3, yeah, 7 that we heard over and over, and then there were some, like what I would describe as outlier comments that we felt it was important to remind everybody that we did hear from some select individuals. We heard a lot of comments about character. People really were able to articulate why they liked the houses that they lived in from the eras that they lived in them. People were concerned about houses getting too large in comparison to the house next door or the house across the street or behind them. People were not that comfortable with a lot of development in their community, so that's kind of what I would describe as the pace of change argument. We live in an era right at this moment where there's kind of, in Southern California, an economic boom and people are able to do a lot of things that's really different than it was in 2008. And so you can drive down some streets and see 3 or 4 houses being dealt with at the same time. And the pace of change makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes it's not so much the one house, but the fact that, you know, oh, there's construction happening all the time and there are hammers banging and they do it on Saturday and stuff like that. Second stories bothered people if they weren't done well. Privacy concerns that one of the commissioners mentioned between side yards overlooking backyards or windows looking into other windows. This is a difficult issue because, as I always point out to people, okay, if I build my second story and I pay attention to your house and I move my windows there and I sort of do something a little bit odd to accommodate you, and then you tear your house down and you build a house, and what, are you going to now start accommodating me who was accommodating the last person? So it's kind of a complex design issue. Subdivisions were talked about. It wasn't, from my memory, it wasn't big, but it was a predominant issue. And within the subdivision, the thing that got talked about a lot was the design of the private streets, that they weren't compatible with the design of the public streets. And then we did hear people say they were concerned about traffic and, you know, conflicts between kids playing and stuff like that, which you always hear and is a real issue. Some people were concerned about parking along the curbs, the fact that people don't park in their garages, you know, those types of comments, which it's true in every community that we've done this type of exercise in. At some point, somebody points out that people don't use garages anymore. They leave their cars in the front yard. And then safety concerns, which really had more to do with the, some of it had to do with the cars speeding through the streets. Some of it just had to do with general concerns about wanting to maintain safe neighborhoods and concern that with too much change and people moving in and out of neighborhoods that the community character would be lost, and part of what would be lost was the people's sense of well-being within their own community. Hit the next one. Okay, so based upon all of that, we sat down with staff and we brainstormed. I think we had 1 or 2 brainstorming sessions with staff, and then we went off into our little hobby hole and we basically developed a round of recommendations which we then presented back to staff. They commented on, and then we are here tonight to present them to you. So you want to hit to the first one. So the first one is to consider reducing the single-family residential baseline FAR from 0.6 to 0.45. I mean, we can go through the math of that. You still basically should be able to build a fairly typical house even if you reduce that FAR a bit, because if you think about what your standard lot was, which was 6,750 square feet, clear, 6,750 times 0.45, you end up with a 3,037 square foot house. Though you have to be careful about these statistics, the median house, new house size built in the United States today is around 2,500 square feet. So people would still, on a typical lot in Downey, be able to build a fairly normative house, even if you were to reduce this FAR. And at the same time, it would kind of begin to carve out some of those outlier houses where the goal is, give me every square foot that the city will allow me to build, no matter what. These 2 drawings that you see here on the bottom is basically kind of our attempt to show what could be built right now under this 0.6 FAR, house sort of put up to the street wall line, garage in front. You have certain setback requirements for second story, percentage of length of second story along the facade line. And on the top, what happens to it if all of the recommendations that we're proposing were to be implemented, including the FAR one that we're talking about right now. So the reality is that the largest house you'd be able to build would change if you were to implement all of these things. I think it's wrong to isolate any one of these recommendations out from all the others, because it's the cumulative collection of all of them that actually begin to shape towards the conversation that we were just having about fit, side yards, size, height, things like that. Okay, you want to go to the next one? We think that there could be some usefulness in taking a look at the floor area definition that the city utilizes right now. We think that by including garages, accessory structures, foyers, mezzanines, and lofts, and tightening up that definition, it will have a tendency to count floor area, which right now is potentially not counted. And if you think about it, if you don't count, like say, garages, then basically someone can build a really large garage, and okay, on one level that's a really good thing if they want a really large garage, but it means every time they keep adding another space to their garage, they're for free increasing the mass and bulk of their house in comparison to, say, some of their neighbors. We are saying, though, that there could potentially be an exempt 400 square feet of detached rear garages. Part of the reason we're suggesting that is there's still a lot of neighborhoods with a prevailing condition with garages in the rear, and if you give them an incentive to build in the rear, you're giving them a signal that they might actually achieve more if they put their garage in the rear than if they bulk up their house by putting it in the front, and only giving them a 200 square foot exemption if it's attached. We're also suggesting that any floor or portion of a floor with a ceiling height greater than 12 feet count twice towards floor area. The reason for this is simply to, again, get people to think about how much bulk they really need, how much volume they really need. Because a lot of the time it's not square footage that's the issue per se, but it's volume. So you're trying to get people to be more sensitive about the volumes they build.
I have a question.
Sure.
Does these exemptions that you're talking about here take into consideration the new accessory dwelling definitions and how people can actually convert garages and other typically non-livable spaces into livable spaces?
Yes and no. I think, it's hard to take into consideration the ADU thing because the ADU basically under state law basically gives every homeowner's rights to build a certain amount of square footage. Cities have some capacity to regulate that, but in general, I think the way that we're thinking about it has more to do at a gross level, which is that right now, if you're at 0.6 FAR, generally speaking, your ADU is on top of that. Meaning if someone's built out all the way at 0.6 FAR and then they come into the city and they say they want to build an ADU, what is the city's position? Can they deny them that ADU? I don't know. So I think what we're trying to do is find kind of a balancing point by addressing that issue in part through maybe it makes sense to constrain the amount of FAR knowing that a lot of people have the right to build ADUs and are going to have that right. So that's sort of my generalist answer. We were not specifically asked to look at your ADU stuff. And I think in most cities that we're working in Culver City on exactly the same issue, their city attorney has been much more aggressive than your city attorney in telling us exactly what we're allowed to say with regard to ADUs. So we're pretty familiar with this issue, but there's a basic right to build them, unless you can prove that you're in a high hazard zone or something like that. But I'm sure that you can give us direction to look at it more carefully, and we would be willing to. Okay, do you want to hit the next one? And oh, by the way, I think state legislation just passed. This allows you to build now a third unit in a single family house if it's in an attached condition. So, I've heard people basically say that for all intents and purposes, there is no such thing as R1 zoning in the state of California at this point. And so that, I think this issue, therefore, of what is appropriate mass, bulk, setbacks, heights, amount of square footage that you're allowed to build, how much flexibility exists within the ADU state legislation or even this new legislation, which I haven't even read yet, but I have had it explained to me. You're allowed to play with a lot of these rules, but the fundamental thing of can you basically really regulate the attached micro or granny unit within the house and the detached or attached ADU unit that's on the outside of the house, There's a lot less flexibility there. In Culver City, just so that you know, we were able to, based in part on community concern, as part of our work, there was a finding of high hazard zone within the hillside areas of the city, and they banned ADUs. City of Los Angeles has had legislation to do exactly the same thing. But in the flats, which is basically what you have here in Downey, in the flats of Culver City, our main response was to basically play around with some of these gross sizes and where you could build it and things like that, which legislation allows you to do. Okay. Oh, introduce a lot coverage maximum of 0.45. For your median size lot, which is around 6,700 to 7,500 square feet, it basically means that you start to correlate the FAR that we're recommending of 0.45 with what basically is the maximum amount of area you could achieve on the ground floor. So all we're trying to do here is make sure that if somebody wants to build a one-story house, which is more cost-effective than building a two-story house, or if you're trying to say we're sending a signal to incentivize people to add on one story more so than build up 2 stories, it makes sense to have a lot coverage that in some way equals your FAR. And the math of that is a little bit complicated as you move across all of these different size lots, but the reality is that for your typical lot, there starts to be a nexus between the amount that you can build on one story versus the size of the lot. And we think that's a good thing. You want to hit the next one? Modify the side yard setbacks. Right now, we've looked at many different versions of this, and we can get into it, and we can make recommendations as to ones that are more aggressive. But right now, what we're suggesting is simply a evolution of your current side yard setback, which is fairly prescriptive and set to 10% of the lot width or 14 feet, whichever is less, but in no case less than 5 feet. And that would be at the ground floor. So if you think about it, on a 27,000 square foot lot that's 180 feet wide, you'd end up with a 14-foot side yard because it doesn't have to be bigger than that, even though at 180 feet, it basically says it has to be 15 feet if it's 10%. So there's a certain point at which as the lot gets bigger, we're saying you don't have to penalize people beyond a certain amount. But on the small lot, which is 50 feet, you'd end up at 5 feet. And if you had a lot that was a little bit narrower than that, I mean, we can talk about what are some of the challenges of that, but it would be basically 5 feet as it went down. There's some cities, and we may want to introduce that type of variance, which says that on smaller width lots that there can be some accommodation, but that's a nuance, really. So this is a little bit more performative than what you have right now. You want to hit the next one? We're also suggesting that at the second story, that the building be modulated along front yards. And this is, in some ways you're already doing this, but we're making it a little bit tighter. What we're basically saying is that 40% of the width of the first floor can be built at the required front yard setback, but the rest of it needs to be set back 5 feet. Then we're saying that as the lots get bigger than that, meaning above 8,500 square feet, the remaining portion of the second story facade must be set back a minimum of 5 feet. I'm not exactly sure how that's contradicting the first one, but this is the first time I've seen this slide, so I'm kind of winging it here. But the first thing is my understanding of what the recommendation is, which is that 40% of the width of the first floor facade, which is at the first floor, you can see the red line there, can be built to the required front yard setback at the second level, and the rest of it has to be set back 5 feet. So the idea is that you don't end up with a uniform box that's coming right off of the front yard line. Okay, you want to hit the next one? We also are suggesting that a similar idea be introduced at side yards to begin to address some of the commissioner's comments about how do you break down the mass at a side yard and basically avoid having just a volume going straight up at a 5 foot or 6 foot or 7 foot side yard. And this one is using a similar formula right now of 40% of the width. I mean, we've discussed other ways of doing it, but we think this is the simplest way right now to present the idea and work with it so that it's understandable. You want to hit the next one?
So are you talking
Sure,
about?
go back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, are you talking about the 5-foot setback to be a balcony or to be a roof line?
It's a really good question. Right now, we haven't suggested anything about the 5 feet, but it would be a natural thing to think about saying that along a side yard, open-air balconies would be prohibited. That we've done that in other cities. We've done it so that you can still build a balcony, like the first, I think we said the first 6 feet from a front plane or a rear plane can be open, but that anything in the middle between that has to be, you just can't have second-story balconies overlooking side yards. So in certain cases, we've tried to accept the idea that people want like upper floor terraces and that it's okay if they overlook rear yards or front yards. In fact, you can see in this illustration that that front-facing thing could be construed as a balcony, and the first 6 feet of depth would look over a side yard. And so we've written things so that it allows that, but wouldn't allow it along that other portion. So that's a direction that we could certainly tighten it up more. 7 would be to, and it's interesting, and one of the very early comments that one of you made about not liking when a garage was sitting so prominently right on the same line of the front, at the front setback. We are suggesting, in part based upon the idea that we did hear a lot of comments from folks who lived in predominantly rear yard garage neighborhoods, that the front-facing garages seem to overwhelm the street. We are suggesting that you limit street-facing garage expression by introducing a 5-foot minimum setback behind the front facade or behind the front lot line, and a maximum garage width relative to the lot width that would still allow people on a wider lot to build a 3-car garage facing the street, but on a narrower lot would basically limit them to 2 doors, so that they still had to make an expression of front door, living room window or whatever.
So you're saying that the facade would be like a window, but not necessarily the entry?
No, actually, again, we haven't explicitly said that people have to have their front doors facing the street at this point, but we could. I mean, we've done that in certain communities. We have done that, where we basically say that the front entry of a house has to face the front yard. It can't.
Don't we have, we talked, excuse me, sir, we talked a little bit about that fabricated house and their door positioning about 2 years ago. Aldo, remember that? When the guy wanted to make a fabricated house, we talked about, is his door facing, what was it, south, or was it facing the street there on Brookshire?
Well, and not to dive too far into it, it's I think the intent was to have that door facing what we defined as the front of the property.
Yeah.
And so that's what the direction was with that model.
Is that the standard for the city?
I'm going to default to our planning staff in terms of that front door.
Thank you, Aldo.
Sure. Mr. Chair, if I may, our current practice right now when reviewing plans is we try to identify the architectural style that is being proposed. With many of the architectural styles that we get, the door typically does face the front of the building. So that is what you're seeing coming out, at least, of our plan checks more often now, because we are trying to set a defined architectural style. I think you do raise a good point in regard to we should maybe try to incorporate that into our design standards. And so believe me, every comment that we're hearing, we're jotting down right now so that when we go back to refine these, we're going to incorporate whatever we believe we're hearing. And the front-facing door is something that's making sense to us and we'll incorporate as well.
Thank you.
And one of the thoughts that I would make about that is if you go back to some of the examples, which we shouldn't do, that you saw, one of the ways that was, because you do have cases where you have like houses in Downey where the garage faces the side, but the garage is oriented towards the front. And sometimes you see the doors oriented to the side too, but they have like porch elements of some sort. So there's a way to write that type of a standard, if you will, so that you say, okay, a house has to have either a garage or an entry element, and then you can define what an entry element is in terms of a porch or an arcade or something like that, that affirmatively faces the front yard of the house towards the primary street frontage or something like that. So there is a way to do that, and it's very straightforward.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, this gets into the weeds a little bit, but one of the things from the presentation you may recall was that I think the more and more we thought about it, the more and more we thought that the thing that a lot of the time drove people, or I shouldn't say drove people, the thing that we could identify that was the least fitting when you saw the subdivisions that we at least had the opportunity to look at was the reality that the private residential street standards were very, very different than the public street standards. So this list that you see here, which I'm sure could be even better refined, was an attempt to try to understand what do you see along the public streets in terms of street trees, sidewalks, and to what extent can that be built into private residential subdivision, driveways and streets and things like that. So that when you see one of these streets coming off or teeing off of a typical residential street, you don't all of a sudden just see an access driveway with no sidewalks, no street trees, no real, like sometimes you see examples where you have an access driveway that's being designed to fire code standards and it has like a 6-foot wall with no landscaping or anything like that, on one side, and then on the other side you see, no sidewalk, a rolled curb, and a 10-foot front yard or something like that. So the goal was to try to codify, if you will, what some of the typical things that one might want to see with a typical street and try to get those things to be aligned a little bit better.
Are you referring here to the private streets that predate like 5 years, or those that have been approved in design and built within the last 5 years?
Both. I mean, I think that we've seen examples where the city has worked very, very hard in some of the newer ones to try to do exactly what we're saying. And I think what we're trying to get at is that some of the work that you're doing case by case right now could be put into the subdivision portions of the zoning code so that you don't have to necessarily have that fight on a case-by-case basis, that some of the standards that you already want to see and are starting to implement just basically are requirements.
Excuse me for a minute. So the last few developments that have come through, like on Telegraph, et cetera, those have been pretty strict as far as the streets and setback and the radiuses for terrain of the fire trucks, et cetera, right? Is that something that we're doing standardized now, or where are we on that?
Well, the code sets a minimum standard. I think that the best example is the development off of Cherokee, where you've got those, I think there are 4 units up there. And then our second bite at the apple, as of recently, was the subdivision off of Morning. And the way we approached it once again was that street needed to mimic as closely the public standards that we use for our public streets. And what we continue to hear from a very practical perspective from the neighborhood is you're going to dump a lot more vehicles into our neighborhood based on the amount of units that are coming in, whether it's for the inhabitants of those units or for any social events that they have. It's just the introduction of a tremendous amount of vehicles. So the goal is for the streets to absorb that activity so that they don't impact the neighbors, and that the streets once again mirror the public streets with some of those standards. And for us, it's been a stretch, at least in those 2 examples, because our code doesn't support that. And so when we go in and try to work with the applicant and or developer, it's pushing as hard as you can, and giving a little and taking a little on those. So what you're hearing tonight is, look, there's a structural approach to incorporate this in the future into our new zoning, if in fact it's the preference of the Planning Commission in the future and or the City Council as well. There's some different tactics, and what you're hearing are some tactics as to how to get to that level.
So what you're saying is there's a standard for the new developments, like the ones like sort of Telegraph
No,
versus the
no,
ones
no.
that
The standards that we're working with are those that have been in place, I believe, since 2010. We try to work beyond those standards to make those streets more like the public streets, so that the multitude of those units that go into those subdivisions don't have a as harsh effect on the surrounding neighborhood.
Okay.
even as simple as curb and gutter.
Yep. Yep.
I think standardization is the way to go. Sir?
And I think the next one is the last big recommendation, right? No, it's not? Oh, we're still in number 8. Okay. Well, these are just more of the private residential street standards continued, and I'm not going through them line by line, so let's go to the next one. Okay, neighborhood compatibility standards. I think, again, this is really, I love that Aldo used the word tactical. This is kind of a tactical approach to how to deal with the subdivisions. When we look at the subdivisions, I think that the more recent ones, clearly there's a lot of work being put into them, but they're being, again, handled individually. And I think what we're trying to say is that, you know what, you can build some standards into your subdivision ordinance or into your zoning code that begin to make some of the decisions just up front. And then the burden, if you want to do it differently, is not on you, but it's on the developer to basically say we can't meet your standards and it's hardship or something like that. So like for instance, and I'll take the first one is maybe a good one to look at in depth. It says the area of subdivided lots excluding any area dedicated for public or private streets and alleys shall not be less than the prevailing lot area and not less than the minimum zoned lot area. What we're basically saying there right now is that some of this is just pure math. When you subdivide these things, oftentimes what you end up with, if it's all private, is you end up with individual lots, and you end up with a lot that is commonly owned or shared, you know, which is the street, right? Well, what we're saying is that if you look at the size of the individual lots on some of these subdivisions, they're by definition going to be less than what's adjoining them. They met their subdivision number, but the end result of the actual yielded lots is smaller. So what we're saying is that when you do one of those exercises, what you have to do is subtract out what is the commonly held area, which is the street or the access drive, and then look at the lots that way in relationship to what's around it. So the idea is that one of the ways of achieving compatibility is to say you ought to have similar lot sizes. And that came out of a direct comment that we heard from the community, which is that, well, when they build these things, they're somehow different than what is immediately next to it, and we feel uncomfortable with that. So that is a tactic to get at that comment that we heard, and you know, it's something that you could consider. You know, the next one, or the third one down there, public street fronting orientation. In some of your newer subdivisions, you're already doing this case by case, but it's simply saying that if you end up with new single-family homes or structures that are facing a public street, they ought to be designed in such a way that they're oriented towards that street rather than being oriented towards the private street in order to maintain continuity with the houses that are already there. And I think that that's good practice. You would want to do that anyway, but I think if you're trying to design something literally as an architect in the most efficient way, you may or may not want to do that. I mean, I've done these things before, and sometimes, you know, as an architect who's like listening to your client, and we're getting paid by our client, they're telling you make it as efficient as you possibly can and give me X number of units. And so, like, in order to do that, and oh, by the way, we only want to have one basic model house, and we'll like change the trim on, you know, 4 of them or something like that. It's like they don't want to introduce a second unit type. And what we're basically saying is, wait, you're going to have to introduce a second unit type. Go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Did I hear you say that we currently have lots in the subdivision that include the surface area of the shared space, like the street, in the calculation of lot size?
Well, at least that was when we analyzed what you had in the cases that we looked at, I think that we saw some of that. We saw some of the subdivisions, and again, you made the distinction earlier between some of the older ones versus some of the newer ones, and you're right, the newer ones, you clearly see that there are a lot more accommodations to the surrounds. What you hear from the community is kind of a combination of just, we don't like the practice. So what we were trying to do was simply say that lot sizes ought to be similar to other lot sizes, and if for some reason somebody takes the access drive and has that be a commonly held parcel. You gotta basically not get to blend in that extra square footage to the lot.
Great. Now, on those that you evaluated that meet your definition, if you subtracted out the shared space, what would be the lot size of what you evaluated? And would that be then consistent with the standard that we currently have in R? What is it? What's the lowest one? 5,000? Would that lot size then be under the R 5,000?
What we said is that you'd need to add a definition for prevailing lot area.
Well, I'm asking you a question. And that question is
Well,
somewhat.
to answer that question,
Yes.
I think what we're saying, and I'm not, I think maybe as prepared to answer it in an exact way as I
Okay.
would like to be, but what I'm saying is that when we looked at it, it gets down to sort of like wrapping your arms about what is prevailing, giving you a definition of what is prevailing, and then having that standard applied to the subdivision. So that there's a methodology so that when something comes forward to you, it's like, well, what's around you? And how did you arrive at that? And you should meet that standard, which is already predetermined.
I think it's really important because if the lots here include public access, then that's really not fair for the consumers purchasing those homes. If you're buying a 6,000 square foot home, but 2,000 square feet of that is shared space with the street, then it's actually a 4,000 square foot lot, which would be under our definitions, right? So I think it's something we really need to look at harshly in order to maintain consistency of lot sizes and the homes that can be built on it in any development. Thank you.
Okay, do we want to go to the next slide? Yeah, this is a math thing. It really is not really a change to the code. It's simply saying that if you look at a 7,500 square foot lot and you apply a 0.45 FAR to it, it's going to start to, and you leave your parking standards alone, it's going to kind of mess with your parking standards and penalize people. So it's simply a ripple effect that if you were to adopt a 0.45, you need to go back and look at some of your other numbers to make sure that the requirements are in line with that. So it's really not a change as much as it is a recorrelation of what you're already doing to a potential revised FAR standard. Okay, we do think that you should introduce some additional landscape standards. This is something I'll just say from a practice standpoint we recommend to every single city. It's a difficult time to be recommending this because we live in a time of drought, but we also live in a time where we have an urban heat island effect, we have loss of tree canopy and things like that. So what we're basically saying is that we think in the long run, and I think at one point Downey was celebrated as one of like America's tree cities or something like that. I remember signs at some point in my dark past driving through the city that celebrated that. One way to get there is with new development to require that there be at least one tree in a front yard and one tree in a rear yard. Now, there's obviously an issue. Does the homeowner maintain that or not maintain that? How do you enforce it? I mean, some of those things go beyond what you can do in a zoning code or what you'll even want to do in terms of enforcement. But I think most people in your city, from what I can see, do have pride of ownership and do really take care of their yards. And I think that encouraging them to plant a tree, those are all examples of drought-resistant trees that don't use a lot of water, is probably a good idea. But we've had other cities tell us, forget that, we don't want to get into it. But we think it's a good idea. So we always propose it because it's about sustainability and resilience and shade and canopy. Okay, what's the next one? Yes, design review. Right now, design review in the city of Downey, as Crystal mentioned, is being done. But it's being done kind of on a staff best practices standpoint. Like you have a very, very qualified staff. They've all been trained. They all are enthusiastic about their jobs, we hope. And they basically sit down and they have conversations with individual homeowners and they try to encourage best practices. But they are not working from anything. There's nothing that they can basically literally hand to the homeowners or the applicants and say, this is how we define design in the city, and this is what we want to encourage you to do. So we are proposing that a set of design guidelines be developed based upon some of these character notions and some of the other ideas we talked about here, and that those design guidelines basically have some type of a checklist that's associated with them, and that staff basically have utilized those when they're doing review to basically determine whether or not a project is in compliance with the design guidelines. If they are in compliance with the design guidelines, is that the next slide? Did we change that? Yeah. So this is basically what we're showing. We're basically saying as a person comes in, staff reviews it in relationship to design guidelines. If they comply, you go to the green line and you're approved. If they don't comply, they can go back and try to comply, and they'll have a very straightforward way of saying, well, you could do this, and that would bring you into compliance. Or they could appeal to your planning director, and he would have the opportunity to basically work directly with them and make a compliance finding. Or if they basically were totally frustrated by staff, they could basically appeal it to you. Our experience is that staff-driven processes work really well. They basically, again, they deal with everything except the real outlier cases, typically in a fairly straightforward way. And it means that the only things that would really ever be coming to you in terms of design would be cases where people either are proposing something that truly is an outlier, or they just have an idea that the Planning Commission has to approve, which happens, right? And that's what your job is in some ways, is to make those types of findings and do it. Because I know from having dealt with all of these folks that they're pretty good at what they do, but it's still a little bit ad hoc right now. Okay, you want to go back one? So, you know, this is a bullet list. We've written these out in more detail, but this is a bullet list. And there are different ways of doing this, but the one that I like the best is, let's say there are 3, 6, 8 on each side. So let's say there are about 20 right there altogether. Typically what we do with the checklists and what we recommend is that you give people a checklist, or you give staff a checklist, and you basically say you have to meet 15 of these 20 or something like that. So that if there are 5 that basically somebody, because of the uniqueness of their design, chooses not to meet, they have a way, the design guidelines themselves are flexible and they can be applied flexibly, but they still kind of create a type of dialogue which allows staff to make a finding that you're in compliance or you're not in compliance. And if you're in compliance, great. So that's the basic idea here. And I think that with that, there are a bunch of other minor things which really are getting into the weeds, which if they get brought up, we can talk about more. But I think with that, what we really should do, because this is a long presentation, is go to the next slide and say, okay, so what you've heard is both a strategic and a tactical approach to making some directed amendments to your existing standards and introducing a more defined design guidelines process that gives staff more leverage with working in a directed way with individual applicants, that gives them, I think, more strength because they're being consistent across all of their work, and it makes it easier for your director to implement a consistent way of doing design review. And so with that, I'll stop and say thank you, and we're all here for your questions, and we're happy to answer them.
You did an outstanding amount of work here and a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. Very thorough and very enlightening. And I personally like the recommendations that you have here, at least the last 2 slides. I'd like to see a little bit bigger print in here than
Yes.
what I received in, but that's for a later thing. I'll now open this up to Commissioner Spathos.
Thank you, Chairman. So, before I jump into questions, I think the last few slides, like he mentioned, were very good, and I think the compliance process that you showed us towards the end was a very good idea with new construction when it comes to single-family homes. I think it's a way to have the planning staff start with guidelines and then work it from there. And if there is something that comes up that is an issue, it can come before the Planning Commission. I don't think there'll be many, but I like that idea. So I'll start from the attendance that you guys had at the community meetings, what was the attendance? How many people did you have show up for both of those meetings?
We had, I think it was 26 at the first meeting and 29 at the second meeting. I believe Commissioner Fermetta was at the second meeting, or the first meeting at Barbara J. Riley Community Center. There you go.
I would like to propose, I'm sure we're going to have other community meetings, but I think it's important to get it out there, whether it's on social media, through the paper somehow, to get more community involvement. I'm surprised that we don't have more people here today just for their input, so we get their ideas as well. So I think it's important to host community meetings where it's not, 20 people, 30 people, where it's a significant amount and we get ideas from a variety of people, including the Planning Commission here today.
Yeah, and that's a continual challenge. We always market through all levels of social media. In addition to that, we put it on the Nextdoor app. In addition to that, we go through our neighborhood associations. In addition to that, we go to written print to the Patriot. And in addition to that, we go to flyers and go old school and put information at all the different community events that we get. And so it's hit or miss. We agree with you. We'd like as many people to participate as possible, because the day after these design guidelines go into effect, somebody will come up and say, I didn't know anything about it. And so that's going to be the first challenge. So we'll continue to market as aggressively as possible. One of the thoughts that I had just listening is we'll also include the realtor groups, the Downey Association of Realtors and all the other different brokerage companies in the community, because they know folks. They know folks that are going to build or buy, and once again, it just casts a broader net.
Well, that's a double-edged sword. If you bring a bunch of developers in here, they're going to try to taint the waters. When the whole focus here is not to cater or get opinions from developers, but rather the residents themselves. So I would say, that might be, a dog we don't want to kick. However, I think we discussed one time that you were going to provide donuts so that we get more residents into these meetings. Didn't we discuss that last time, Aldo?
We had pizza.
Pizza, was it? Yes. Pizza.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, for evening meetings, donuts are not the thing.
Regardless, I think it's important to get as many community members involved as possible, just to get feedback on all aspects of this. Another question I have for you, in reducing the FAR from 0.60 to 0.45 on the single level, does that, from your perspective as a professional, force people to go up?
No, I think the whole idea was to basically, and I think that if, as a commission, you said proceed with that direction, I think the one thing we could do was put a little more energy into the metrics of it, just to prove to you. The idea is that if you're at 0.45 on a typical lot, you should be able to get a very large percent of that in a one-story house, given what your side yard and front yard and rear yard setbacks are, which is why I was saying it correlates to the maximum 0.45 lot coverage. We just did this exercise in Culver City. The median lot size there is pretty similar to what we have here in Downey. And basically, we were able to demonstrate that you got 98% of the FAR in one story on a typical lot. So we know that the numbers are very close, and I think that the trick would be to show you some of those examples from a just basic diagramming standpoint so that you saw that there was a nexus.
Okay. I think that would be a good idea, because if I were a home builder and I wanted to utilize a property as much as possible, and I had a 45 percentage lot to build on, my simple brain would say, build up. Let's add square footage.
Well, actually, the interesting thing is that our experience in this is exactly the opposite of what you just said. One of the challenges, again, with an exact same, well, I shouldn't say exact same, a very similar typical lot type in Culver City, was that we originally proposed a more stringent lot coverage requirement in order to encourage people to build their mass and bulk away from the rear yard setback line and to increase the amount of spacing between houses that were back to back. And the criticism that we got, which from their planning commission, which specifically came from an architect member of their planning commission, was that in an age in which, or in an era in which house prices are so high and construction costs are so high, that you shouldn't impose a lot coverage requirement that shrinks the available area within the setback line such that people read the code and build up. That you should allow people to have the choice of trying to get as close as they can to the maximum yield on one story, or taking that addition that's squeezed out like a toothpaste tube into the theoretical backyard and stick it on the second story, but in that way move it further away from the rear lot line. So I do think that there's I took that comment very seriously in Culver City because I thought it was a really smart observation that that gentleman made, and we took it to heart and we built that into the code there.
Mm-hmm.
And so since then we've been kind of proposing a similar variant of that on these types of things.
Okay. Another question for you: when it comes to ADUs, by lowering the FAR, does that allow larger build-outs on potential ADUs in the future?
I think whatever your ADU ordinance, what's the maximum ADU size in your city?
The reason I ask that, before she answers that, the reason I ask that is everything's going to change from what I understand. So if you have less building allowed on a lot, it's going to give potential developers in the future to build possibly even more than one ADU.
Well, first of all, you can build more than one ADU as of right now.
Right.
But the second one, I think, has to be attached to the house or within the body of the house. And that's the other
Mr.
thing
Chair,
is under state law, at least, the maximum size of an ADU is 1,200 square feet, and the cities are given a certain amount of flexibility to reduce that. So I know that in Los Angeles, the prospective ordinance is a maximum ADU size of 600 square feet. And I think that's the smallest that the state law says you can go down to.
Mr. Chair, if I may, staff is currently working right now, and we've been consulting with staff at HCD. We are, after they release their guidelines, probably mid-December, going to be working on our update to our ADU ordinance, which will then be coming to the council probably February is what we're sort of anticipating right now, assuming HCD releases on time. With regard to the maximum size, all of the sizing has changed. 850 now is the minimum that the state allows us to set. I'm sorry, 850 is the maximum that the state allows us to set, unless they're doing more than one bedroom, then it's 1,000. We are still allowed to apply all of our lot coverage and FAR provisions. However, the state also included another provision which stated if the full application of all of our standards will result in a property not being able to build an ADU, then all of our standards are superseded and they're allowed to build an ADU up to 800 square feet. So we can apply and we will apply unless that provision comes into effect. So we are trying to keep that in mind. That is something that sort of came out after this entire process got started. But as we were preparing and getting ready to come and go out to the public again, that's something that we are conscious of, and we're trying to keep that in mind. But again, it's a fun little path that we're on right now.
I think it's important for us to establish city ADU guidelines before we dive into changing the FAR locally, citywide. I think it's going to be very important, especially after the new law comes into effect. Okay, good. So design standards and design guidelines, you mentioned the difference between the two. So what you're presenting here today seems more like guidelines rather than standards.
It's both.
Okay.
I think, unfortunately, the way we did the presentation is we concentrated more on the shalls than the shoulds, and we had the last two slides be about the shoulds. I think the reason for that is in terms of how it impacts people, the shalls impact people directly. Like, as you were just saying, it's a big thing for a city to say we're going to lower our FAR in residential neighborhoods from X to Y. It is a big thing, but it's more nuanced to say we really want you to build in the minimal traditional or the, you know, millennial mansion or whatever it is style, and if you're not choosing to build in those, you need to follow these 5 parameters. I think, I don't know, so that's why we concentrated on the shalls more than the shoulds, though, you know, we've been in cases where we did all the shalls and the shoulds and the city has said we only want to do shoulds. So please go write design guidelines. And we've been in the opposite where we were hired to do design guidelines and we ended up writing zone text amendments for shalls.
Okay. That's it for my questions. Then just comments. I like the tree idea for the front and the rear yards. Great idea. And also, I saw somewhere in your packet, you didn't mention it today, but you mentioned in the packet something about 3-tier landscaping practices that I think might be a good idea to throw in there as well. Always looks nice when you have levels, especially starting from the street to the home. That's all.
Commissioner Fermetta.
Thank you for the presentation. Great presentation. And Jimmy had asked a lot of the questions I was going to ask. But I will ask one question in regards to the design. Are we going to be limiting the design the residents can choose? There's like 5 different criterias. So, or can they design the home that they desire?
Can you go back to that slide? That one. Okay, first thing I want to say is I'm agnostic on this issue. I don't believe there's good design and bad design in the sense that you just described. I think that we're doing urban design when we talk about design guidelines, and there are communities that choose to embrace more restrictive character guidelines, and there are communities that want to go exactly the opposite direction and basically want to encourage innovation, however one might think about that. What we heard when we went out to the community in the 2 community meetings that we attended, and what we heard when we talked to staff, was that there was a lot of comfort in this community with the way things have been done and were built in the past, and that in some ways there seemed to be a lot of desire to figure out a way to craft a design guidelines regimen that would maintain the continuity of that. And so that is why you see on the 3rd bullet that we said use characteristic residential architectural styles, colors, and materials, and that's why in the initial presentation we made the effort to try to describe what the characteristic styles are that you see in this town. I think that if you choose to go down that route, which I'm totally comfortable with as a practitioner, because it's a democratic process, and I believe that local communities should be allowed to sort of go these directions, that you nevertheless still have to provide outlets within the design guidelines for people who have other ideas. And so in that regard, what we typically do is in these types of guidelines, we write some findings in terms of what I would describe as larger order values, like maintain front yard setbacks in terms of street wall, provide well-landscaped side yards, meet all of the design standards of the city, so that when it either comes to staff, the director, or you, that you can talk about the character of a project in ways that aren't specific to an individual style. But for the vast majority of folks who live in any community, if they're presented with a set of guidelines that say, here are 5 ways you can do it and you can get through the process, the home builders, the real estate folks, the architects, they know that, and they're just going to say, this is the way to get through the process quickly. And then from the community standpoint, the vast majority of things that are made are getting closer to that ideal which they already have as a sense of identity.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Previous Chair Owens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, thank you very much for a very detailed and informed presentation. I have no comments at this time, but I appreciate, again, how detailed this information you've presented is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Doherty.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. You know, one thing that I kind of wanted to ask, and I think Commissioner Fermetta mentioned, I think you kind of mentioned, is, you know, when you were discussing that, you know, people kind of want to bring themselves into their homes in terms of, you know, maybe where they're from, and I think you were kind of hitting on maybe ethnicity. In terms of the standards, how much leeway do they have in terms of, you know what, bringing some of the, you know, what they perceive as pride of ownership? How do we balance that in terms of, you know, the character and trying to be uniformal, and, you know, having somebody who, you know, they believe subjectively maybe is something that's nice to them?
Well, that's a really good question. It's really hard to answer because in some ways it's probably the most profound question in terms of having an academic conversation about this.
John, can I maybe provide some?
Go.
So a very endearing nomenclature that I learned when I first started here 5 years ago was Downey eclectic. And it was, as John had presented, kind of, and what the Planning Commission saw in terms of those housing styles was kind of a hodgepodge of things that were built on large two-story homes. As you saw, those large entryways, that was the fad, either by a ethnicity that was moving into town, or folks that just are attracted to that type of design. But we have that going on now, and a lot of folks perceive that as being a challenge. When we get applicants at the counter and they say, hey, you know, I'm going to build a Spanish-style home, and it doesn't fit anything into the traditional definitions of a Spanish-style home, or I'm going to build a Mediterranean home, and just doesn't fit anything into those definitions. So if anything, what we want from a staff perspective are guidelines. Let's start with a set of rules. Whatever those rules are, let's start there so that we could start to set the stage in terms of the direction that we're going to send people. Because right now, those rules are very vague. And one of the first things we hear in terms of critiques are, why did you allow that thing to be built? You know, it doesn't look like anything in the neighborhood. And what I instituted approximately 3 years ago were informal compatibility studies. The last one that I think we did was done by Guillermo, our principal planner, and that's for the house that's being built off of Brookshire between Cherokee and Florence on the east side of the street. And it's taking a look at the neighborhood and seeing what is the architectural style of that neighborhood, what's the character of that style. And in a lot of neighborhoods, there's none. We just found that, once again, there's houses that look good individually, but there's no consistent architectural style as those neighborhoods started to evolve. And in those instances, we tell people, yeah, you can build your Spanish-style home, your Tudor-style home, or your Mediterranean home, but we'd like it to be built authentically and sincerely to that style. And so that's where the conversation goes. You know, those types of designs have certain roof characteristics, you know, facade characteristics, and so forth. So our staff response to Commissioner Duarte's question would be, we'd like more defined, traditional, regimented design standards that could reflect a lot of different architectural designs. You know, there could be 20 different architectural designs, 30 different, 15. But if you're going to pick something, then we'd like you to build to that style, that authentic style. And once again, the commission has heard tonight, has expressed through their exercise, you know, involve that level of compatibility, massing, scale, and so forth to the neighborhoods.
Aldo, is there like a set definition for each one of these different styles that someone who's knowledgeable of the art will say, yes, this conforms by ABC, or is it set by the staff?
No, it's generally there's industry standards in terms of the design world, and there might be some fluctuations in terms over the years for how those designs have evolved. But no, you can get to a core set of elements within a certain architectural design to be able to provide somebody guidance that wants to build in a certain type of a scheme.
And we don't have that currently.
No, we currently don't have it formally. We do it informally. And so we push and push and push based on the informal compatibility studies that we do when new products are presented to us. And some folks, follow our examples in our lead, and others don't. Others get to a point where they just say, no, we disagree. Show me where it says it in this code that I have to do it that way. And that's where, you need to yield.
No further questions.
So we can write something up that reflects what he just said in the proposition.
That's what we're basically proposing.
I have nothing
I
further.
don't know that it actually completely answers Mr. Duarte's comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Look forward to seeing you again.
Yes.
Great.
Public comment.
So now we'll go to public comment. If anyone in the audience feels that they wish to come up and speak, please do so now.
And this is public comment for the presentation that was just made.
Please step forward.
$8:25. We started at 6:40. Such a filibuster. Anniversary of Developer Planning Commissioner Jose Huizar FBI investigation for money laundering from developers. Is that the scheme of Downey? Because Hess versus Indiana, for the record, as I will quote, "We'll take the effing streets back again. We'll take the effing streets back later." Now, the design study here, based on John, as far as I'm concerned, dates back 108 years since Downey has decided to grow. And the poor quality of bad planning decisions is obvious, very obvious. The dramatic change from 1911 to 1935, 24 years, 6 changes. 6 changes. And then we come up with the bullshit of Millennium Mansions that really effed up our community. Drastic change. And I got to choose between A, B, C. I chose none of them because you're not in compliance. Whatever bullshit commission we had in the past is what fucked this issue up. That brings the attention of the people to raise opposition. Yeah, Jimmy can pat his eyes, but it's the truth. If I was in Aldo Schindler's point of view after 5 years and owning 2 homes, one here in Downey and one in Sacramento, 2-story, 5-bedroom homes, I would be happy. That's a hell of a gateway city. But again, this all started in July 2018. Only first meeting consisted of 26 people of the community out of 100,000 population. Then it went to 29, and as of tonight, I'm probably one of 2 speakers to discuss this issue. One of 2. As far as the ADU, whatever the hell it stands for, FAR, whatever the acronym stands for, I'm here in denial because the majority of the population in Downey is being deprived on the conditions of what real planning in Downey should look like and reflect. Not the highs, not the lows, not the could haves and could not have. That's the reason why KB Homes off of 3rd in Reeves and Paramount is the eyesore of Downey's dilemma. You took our R1 community and destroyed it and put 3-story high blight, dark condominiums, residential homes, whatever the hell you want to call it, sitting out there because you overpriced at $700,000. Now an R1 home in Downey, you can't even afford to touch at $4.5 to $600,000, and you own a piece of property. You're not in a density-built KB home. Eyesore, which takes away the integrity, the character, and the look that I can't see the mountains off of 3rd Street anymore. Shame on you. Shame on any one of you. As far as the culture, it was the culture that dramatically changed the look of Downey in the Millennium Mansions. That look, Greek, Chinese, I don't know what it is, but it's horrible. It does not meet, fix, or look the idea of what Downey was at one time in place back in 1911 to this day. If you want to follow the aesthetics of looks, go to Pasadena, where I work at 91109 zip code, 100 North Garfield Avenue, S228 Suite. Visit my P.O. Box 7115 for the record. Let that reflect my opinion. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to render an opinion? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, this is like representing the majority of our population in Downey. We are 113,000 according to the last census in 2017. So what I wanna put in consideration very briefly is like to confirm or clarify myself as a resident in Downey. If you have another presentations regarding this issue, how developed or improve the Downey city. Is the only presenter that you have on hands? You have another ones? I think the first game should be at least, we can see 2 more presentations and then we can go from that. Another thing that I like to notice is if it's possible, bring numbers or statistics. If they question or they make surveys in Downey population, residents, what they think, what they really think about the changes in Downey, what they feeling, what the consideration they really have with the people that we living in Downey. Certain residents, we are very high impact with increasing business, but the majority of residents, we are working class. And those taxes hit us really hard. So the business making money, the residents not. So we like to bring attention, all of these issues are simple, just only we like to see a fair game. 2 more presenters, so should be 3 at least in order to be more fairly in what we decide in the future. Unfortunately, the people working, they are not here because they're working. So at least a few people that we are here, we're trying to speak up for those populations. So just as my comments so far, and I appreciate your time and you work hard in these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and speak? Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Hector Schmidt. I'm a resident of Downey since '97. I live along Old River School Road, in between Quill, Stewart and Gray. What I enjoy about this presentation is the interactiveness of the presentation. It reminded me of my first, it reminded me of the meeting I met with John Deasy on September 20th, 2011. And his presentation had a similar context, and we had these devices where we were involved in the presentation. I like that fact of just involving the audience, if the technology's there, to get a survey results. I believe, I don't know, most likely you're probably familiar with it, but just in case if you're not, that's the impact I enjoyed most about this meeting. Thank you for the presentation. It's the presentation that as a student, I'm learning about government meetings and stuff. And again, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to move forward and speak? Okay. Does the Director of Community Development have any changes to the agenda?
Well, but before we move on the agenda, I think we just want to close out this topic here, now that public comment is closed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to collect the comments that we heard tonight from the Planning Commission, and we're going to consolidate those into the comments that we've heard from the community as well. And so we're going to find a way to, in a very efficient manner, communicate those at our next community meeting. We'll most likely go through a very similar exercise, hopefully with a whole new crop of new people that attend that meeting, so that we can collect more information and involve as much diversity as we can in terms of the data that we collect. And then we'll go back and start crunching numbers and looking at concepts and continuing to brainstorm the direction that we should head in, and then be in front of the Planning Commission once again, hopefully in the first quarter of next year, if not maybe the second quarter. And so with that concludes our presentation for tonight.
Thank you.
And if I may, I would suggest we take a very quick break to allow the consultant team to break down their IT material, and then we can head on from there.
We'll break till 8:50. All right, we're coming back on. Does the Director of Community Development have any changes to the agenda?
The only change to the agenda is item number, I'm sorry, give me a second. Yes, item number 3, the PLN 19-00168 zone text amendment will be continued to a date uncertain. All municipalities statewide are waiting for firm direction from the state regarding the 5 new accessory dwelling unit laws that are going to go into effect on January 1st of 2020.
So, point of clarification, do you need a motion on this, Aldo?
I don't, I think that would be fine. Just
Okay.
A motion to continue to date uncertain.
You want a motion? Okay, motion, do I have a second?
Second.
We'll vote.
Gotta load the program.
The screen?
All right, voice vote, then Mary?
Yes, can we take an audible vote right now? Oh, actually, it just came up. My apologies. Okay, the vote is now open. Please place your votes.
Mary, the screen?
Oh, my apologies. It's okay.
That's a different screen. New screen, huh?
It was motioned
Big
by
and loud.
it was motioned by you, Chair.
No subtlety.
And the second
Second by Owens.
the second
Owens.
was who?
Owens.
Okay, it was moved by Chair Dominguez, seconded by Commissioner Owens to continue PLN 19-00168 zone text amendment to a date uncertain, passed by unanimous vote.
Thank you. Does the Director of Community Development have a report on any city council actions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Dominguez. At the last council meeting, the City Council heard a call for review regarding the redevelopment of the Reeves Mansion. They heard testimony from staff, they heard comments from the public, and they voted to uphold the direction of the Planning Commission on that item. And that concludes my update.
Thank you. Now's the time set aside for public hearings. The public hearing for PLN-19-0165 is now open. Does the Secretary have proof of publication? Will the
Yes,
Director?
we do.
Thank you. Will the Director of Community Development introduce staff making the presentation?
Yes, in a moment, when we get the presentation up on the screen, we have Guillermo Ariola, our principal planner, that will be presenting this item.
So, can we adjust the temperature in here to warm this joint up, or do we not pay the gas?
Get closer, guys.
Well, hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
Fixing the technical difficulty.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, before you use application PLN 19-00165, it is a special event application for Bastards American Canteen's Veteran Day event at 11045 Downey Avenue. The event will take place Sunday, November 10th from noon to 10 p.m. And the property is zoned a downtown specific plan, again, located at the corner of Downey and 2nd Street. The event is basically the same as they've had the last few years, located in the rear parking area, behind the Bastards American Canteen. And the event, and there's the parking lot, and the event will include perimeter crowd control fencing, a 10 by 10 stage with live entertainment from noon to 10 p.m. It'll include vendors, a beer trailer, and beer garden. A staff member will be placed at the entrance to check IDs and provide colored wristbands. Sale and consumption of alcohol is limited to the beer garden area. Mary? To the beer garden area. A total of 6 security guards will be stationed throughout the event. Setup will begin Sunday at 6 a.m. and breakdown will end by Monday at 2 a.m. As part of the DRC review for this project, standard conditions of approval were submitted by Planning, Building Safety, and Public Works. However, the fire department required the applicant to meet with the fire chief prior to the issuance of fire permits. They wanted to make sure that the applicant was fully aware of everything that was required. Subsequently, the applicant submitted a site plan which was approved by the fire department, and fire department permits were issued for the project. And the other one was the police department requiring 6 uniformed security guards for the duration of the event. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Were there any substantial changes from our last year's or year's previous CUPs to the one for this year?
Just some very minor ones. As you can see, this one actually has a stamp from the fire department, and that is because the fire department required the location of the generator right here on the street. Now, mind you, New Avenue Second Street is private property. It is shared by this property and the property across the street, so it's not a public street. When I saw this, I had the same question. However, because it's private property, they are allowed to put it there, and I asked, well, what about safety purposes? And the fire department actually stated that, in fact, this is actually much safer than having a parked car there because of the low flash point of the diesel generator. They just provided the 10 feet here for egress for the businesses adjacent to the site. Other than that, no changes.
See, we have vendors listed. That's the alley.
Yes, sir.
Isn't that where we had ambulances parked last couple of years?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware.
Didn't we discuss that like a couple of years ago to have the alley as a emergency services station?
Well, they won't this year. They're going to have vendors here.
So where are the PMTs going to be?
There are no MTs required for this event.
Huh. Okay.
They are required, Mr. Chairman, and to add, they are required to have accessible paths of travel throughout the event. So.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Am I confusing two different events? But I thought last year they closed Second Street.
For Memorial Day.
It was Memorial Day. Okay. We're not closing Second Street then.
The Second Street will remain open.
Correct. Okay.
Maybe I'm confused too. Commissioner Spathos.
You said you're leaving Second Street open, but the generator is going to stay in a space where a parked vehicle is?
That is correct.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So where are people coming in and out of? Second Street?
Right here. This is the entrance to the event. This is where the ticket sales take place. This is where people come in.
Sidewalk, basically, they're walking in.
Yes.
Going in through there. Okay. That's all.
Commissioner Frometta.
Generator being on the sidewalk or down on the street, there's a sidewalk. How are the cables being protected?
Whatever cables they have to put through here have already been looked at by fire department and will be looked at by the building department as well to provide the proper covering and for accessibility.
Okay. Were there any issues last year in this event?
No significant issues, sir.
No.
No, sir.
Okay.
I mean, no, let me just take that back. There was no issues associated with the operation of this event. That's what I meant to say.
Thank you.
Mr. Herman, you have been making comments throughout this meeting when it's not time for public comment. I'm going to ask you to, and you're being warned, to stop being disruptive.
Previous Chairman Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Ariola. Yeah, I support this event. It's always well run, tightly run. I like the idea of the generator where it's at. And to Commissioner Fermetta's comments about cables, I'm sure they're adequately protected. They'll serve power to both the stage and the vendors. That's part of the idea. And that's all I have to say.
Vice Chairman Downey.
No questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Before I call the applicant and his or her representative, this will be a time for any planning commissioner to disclose any pre-hearing site visits or pre-hearing discussions the commission may have had about the project. Commissioner Spathos.
None.
Commissioner Frometta.
None.
Vice Chairman Owens.
None.
Vice Chairman Duarte.
None.
And none for me. Will the applicant and his or her representative please come forward to give testimony? Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Eulalia Lopez. I'm a representative of Bastards American Canteen. I live in the city of Norco. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I'm open to any questions.
Do you want to say anything?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to have the event again. It's the 7th year, celebrating our nation's veterans and the Marine Corps birthday. It's going to be a great event as usual. We have, in addition to the 6 security officers, we have 4 Downey police officers, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon shift, and 2 in the evening shift, to make sure that the event is run safely and without any kind of incidents. You mentioned that we had EMTs. There's not been EMTs, but we do have medical staff on standby always. They're a call away, and we've never had to utilize them, thank God. So it's, like I said, it's always been a great event.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Spathos.
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Frometta.
No questions.
Vice Chairman Owens.
I have none. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte.
None.
Sir, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Has there been any correspondence in favor or opposition?
Mr. Chairman, there have been none.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak either in favor or opposition to the application?
I would like to make for the record that my applauding was not a disruption, and that if I'm going to be targeted for an action that was inappropriate, I suggest as a warning, keep in mind that the color of the law, COL, does not deprive me of those privileges under 1842 USC 242 and 245 for the record. Thank you. Now, as far as Bastards, there's never been problems. They've done a great job at exercising the rights of the Marines in a celebration. My neighbors were Marines. My uncle was a Marine. Unfortunately, my brother was a U.S. Army. But hoorah to them all, serving our country, and gave me the First Amendment right to conduct my free speech here with you tonight. I applaud them. Now, as far as my belief about the police, that pretty much is a waste of my tax-paying dollars. The police should just do their normal patrolling. Marines know how to take care of a situation if it gets out of control. They're good people, just like myself. Yes, we like to absorb alcohol in a festival of fiestas. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what necessity and convenience of alcohol is for. To enjoy. As Jesus said, let me turn this water into wine. Not that I'm religious. Jesus did that as an example to show you the power of God in celebration of marriage and celebration overall in celebration. But we should never indulge in over drinking, because then we would be in violation and breaking the morale of what we believe is a practice pattern of festivities. So again, just like on item 43, the police, the applicant shall have 6 licensed security guards, which he said he would, and I'm sure they will be there, along with myself and maybe a few hundred Marines who believe that this is going to be a great day of celebration for the United States of America and our 45th president, Donald Trump, in which I support. The hell with the impeachment. That's my belief. That's my opinion. Hoorah. Then on item 45, on and before Friday, November 8th, 2019, the applicant shall obtain Downey Police Department's approval of security plan. Well, the plan has always been the same. Yes, we have increased security by fewer more securities, but the event is not a place of disruption, or, as you called out on me tonight, clapping my hands was a disruption. Negative. Then on item 48, a security guard shall be stationed at the main entrance for the duration of the event to verify IDs and a head count. Well, head count, I don't believe in. IDs are always required at all restaurants, all areas where beverages are sold. Even in the US Festival, you had to have an ID, although they smoked their ass off with all that cannabis. So you see, when you do something good for the country, we should celebrate. As far as this impeachment and bringing down our 45th president, Marines, Army, Air Force, Navy, protect the 45th president at all due costs. This is America, and we're going to make America great again. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward and speak on this matter? Does the applicant wish time for rebuttal? Okay. Does the planning staff have a recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, staff recommends the Planning Commission adopt the attached draft resolution approving application PLN 19-00165, special event for Bachelor's American Canteen Veterans Day event.
Thank you. The hearing on PLN 19-0065 is now closed. This is the time for the Planning Commission discussion. Commissioner Spathos.
No comments. I approve this resolution.
Commissioner Fournette, any comments?
No comments?
Previous Chairman Owens, any comments?
None, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Duarte, any comments?
None.
I have no comments either. What is the pleasure of the Planning Commission? May I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second? Sorry, go ahead. Second by Duarte. Have a vote, please, Mary.
The vote is now open. Please place your votes. It was motioned by Commissioner Spathopoulos, seconded by Vice Chair Duarte to approve PLN 19-00165. All in favor?
Thank you, Mary. So the action of the Planning Commission will be final unless there is some reason for a appeal to the City Council. Okay. All right, we'll move on here now to the next presentation. PLN-19-0076 is now open. Does the Secretary have proof of publication?
Yes, we do.
Will the Director of Community Development introduce staff making the presentation?
Thank you, Chairman Dominguez. Once again, we have Guillermo Areola, our principal planner, to provide the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Before you use a CUP application, PLN 19-0076, again, a conditional use permit for the installation of antennas on an existing Southern California Edison Tower, 10046 Imperial Highway, and develop with a nursery. The property is zoned R1. The property is located adjacent to or just south of the Imperial Highway. We have to the south the 105 freeway. To the east, we have oops, I'm so sorry. Getting used to this mouse. To the east, we have a storage facility and the riverbed. And to the west, we have the Park Regency Apartments. And this is the site plan of the property. As you get to the long property and the antennas are going to be located about a little over 700 feet from the front property line. The proposal, and this is an overhead of the tower, the proposal will include 3 antenna arrays, 1, 2, 3. It will include 9 6-foot tall panel antennas, 1, 2, 3, and then you can find them on the other array. 6 28-inch tall wireless remote radios, and 3 29-inch tall junction boxes installed on a 111-foot tall Southern California Edison tower. In addition to the antennas, there will be an enclosure, a 256 square foot enclosure, 16 by 16, 8-foot high block wall. The enclosure will include equipment cabinets, a transformer, and a generator with a 54-gallon diesel tank. And these are photo sims, existing, proposed, and from the north, existing, proposed. On May 14th, staff held a DRC meeting. Standard conditions were provided by all the departments. The fire department did include a condition, though, regarding the safety measures for battery storage within the enclosure. The project as proposed complies with section 9426 of the municipal code regulating wireless telecommunications facilities, and complies with the latest FCC legislation regulating these types of facilities. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a succinct presentation. Commissioner Spathos?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Fermetta?
Thank you for the presentation. Real quick, the 8-foot enclosure for the generator, does it have a fencing on top of it? Or
Nope.
it just to protect it?
Correct. It is just an 8-foot high block wall enclosure.
Okay.
We're building the wall.
They're building a wall.
Previous Chairman Owens.
No questions, thank you.
Welcome.
Vice Chairman Duarte?
None, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Before I call the applicant and his representative, this will be a time for any planning commission to disclose any pre-hearing site visits or pre-hearing have had about the project. Commissioner Spathos?
None.
Commissioner Frometta?
None.
Previous Chairman Owens?
None, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte?
None, thank you.
And none for me either. Will the applicant and his representative please come forward to give testimony? Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Chris Colton, Spectrum Services on behalf of Verizon Wireless. My address is 4405 East Airport Drive, Suite 100, Ontario, California, 91761. Thank you very much for your time today. I've reviewed the draft conditions of approval with Verizon Wireless, and they accept them as written. Thank you, Guillermo, for the great presentation. I just want to clarify that there is a security cage proposed on top of the block wall, and I'm here to answer any questions you should have.
Can you hear me now? Commissioner Spathos?
We apologize.
It's late, okay.
No questions.
Commissioner Frometta?
No, thank you for clarifying that there is a cage in front of, on top of that. That was
welcome.
my concern.
Previous Chairman Owens?
None, thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte?
None, thank you.
Sir, thank you very much for coming forward.
Thank you.
Sir. Has there been any correspondence either in favor or opposition?
Mr. Chairman, there have been none.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to come forward and speak either in opposition or in favor of this application?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you can hear me now. Absolutely. But let's go to page 11 on the agenda of this item regarding the findings for conditions of approval attached to Exhibit A, which were to preserve the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Now, I'm not an engineer on this matter, but my understanding that sometimes there's this electrical interference with microwaves that are created or generated that are potentially cancer-driven. Now, what the public wants to know is my statement true or not, Jimmy or Patrick? You're the contractor. You've done that for years, Mr. Owens. So, again, the community shall not be exposed upon the liability of this creation of attachment despite your 8-foot wall, netted caging to prevent someone from being electrically charged or killed in attempt to steal power for their transmission of their cell phones, especially the homeless. So I believe that you should have an additional, not wall, but cage restricting people from entering anywhere 15 feet of that area as a protection zone because of my understanding what microwave can do to you, especially from where the distance of what your photos show on this item. Then, in addition to that, for the safety of the public, that was one point of my opinion. Again, we're in an area of R1 single-family residential area. Why can't we just remove these power lines that are not needed? I mean, there was a great presentation at City Hall today by Erica Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, with a few council elected officials who had a discussion about using solar to pass energy into our communities for the basis of running non-lines in order to prevent fires. Because they blamed Edison and PG&E for those fires. And I can conclude for a fact the Getty fire was started by a diffusion of those electrical lines caused by a branch, because Edison and those other electrical municipal capacity companies don't want to get out there, trim, maintain, and clear brush from those electrical lines, which has burned 9,000 plus hundreds of acres lately on our news. Don't blame this on global warming like those young girls did downtown in our presentation from the UK. Children don't know better about the end of times to come like me. We're living in the last days. For that reason, we're having these problems. Stop blaming homeless people. Stop blaming the millennium. Yes, they don't know shit. I do. That's why I'm here tonight at almost 10 o'clock pointing out my opinion about Edison and those other electrical companies that pump their energy into our small little town. So keep in mind my opinion. You want clean electricity? Go to the city of Los Angeles and learn from those scumbags how to steal energy without cutting into our lines and putting us into the madness of darkness. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to come forward to give testimony? Okay. Does the applicant care for rebuttal time? Okay. Does the planning staff have a recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, staff recommends
Planning Commission adopt the attached resolution approving application PLN-19-00076, a conditional use permit to install telecommunication antennas at an existing Southern California Edison tower.
The hearing on PLN-19-0076 is now closed. It's time for us to have a discussion. Commissioner Spathos.
No comment, Chairman.
Commissioner Frometta.
No comment.
Previous Chairman Owens.
I have no issue and as well no comment. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte.
No comment.
I have no comments also. What is the pleasure of the Planning Commission? May I have a motion?
A motion to accept.
Second.
We have a second and a first, Mary. Can we have a roll call?
The vote is now open. Please place your votes. And the motion passes with all 5 in favor to approve PLN 19-00076 for a conditional use permit, with all in favor.
Thank you, Mary. So the action here of the Planning Commission is final. It is appealed to the City Council. Okay, now it's time for non-agenda public comments. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to come forward and give a non-agenda public comment?
Targeted. What does it mean when you're targeted? What is SLAP? Strategic lawsuit against the public based on TROs and Threat Management Unit, TMU from Sacramento, which was created to suppress, censor, and monitor free speech. Isn't that a shameful way to start off non-agenda public comment? If there's no non-agenda public comment, the result could be a destruction of what we call free speech in this country. And we'll be living like those third world countries who keep demanding that we, the United States, provide them a sanctuary city. But I like the ICE because ICE protects veterans who are homeless. It allows veterans and citizens of the United States, natural-born citizens with a Social Security, to benefit from program, service, and activities under the American Disability Act, so much as SSI disability. But this country is in a turmoil of democratic pollution, impeachment against the 45th president over your fake fucking lies, the media. Lie after lie. If it wasn't for Donald Trump, we would still have illegal immigration coming into this country illegally, not by visa, not by a true stance of due process, but that done by Nancy Pelosi, the hag from San Francisco, and whoever our representation of Washington is, and to my disbelief, is it the credible Roybal Allard, whose father was a United States Marine and then became an elected official at the city of Los Angeles and then became a representative of Washington? Shame on you, Roybal Allard. You're nothing more but a photo op, just like Maxine Waters, just like Nancy Pelosi, and that terrible little dirty bitch, Kathy Hill. So, because of my rant, I've been exposed to threats. I've been exposed to harm physically, emotionally, and distress by the accosted government of local entities who have disgracefully, by plan land use management, and has not provided you or I or the public for affordable, rentable, controllable housing. And so the millenniums will be now our future of homeless people, unable to support their actions of no action because they believe in a diplomacy of democracy under Democrats who have fucked my United States country up. And yes, fucked up. 42 USC 1983, constitutional, California constitutional protection of free speech without censorship, without monitoring me, Ms. Janice Hahn, and turning off the mic when I speak at the Board of Supervisors. Stop it, Janice Hahn. You fucked up with Seabreeze before you went to Washington with those political, corrupted people from Los Angeles. Stop. It's enough. And I wish to speak on my other 5 minutes as well.
Thank you.
For public on special meeting agenda.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to have a speak on non-agenda public comment? All right. We're moving on to consent calendar. I will be abstaining from number 4 and number 5 of the consent calendar. Is there any other commissioner who wishes to abstain?
I'm abstaining on number 4.
Anyone else? All right. I have a motion to approve the sections number 4 and 5 on the consent calendar.
Motion to approve.
Second.
The vote is now open. Please place your votes. Abstain?
Yeah.
The yellow one?
Yeah, got it.
You gotta hit it. You gotta hit it.
Hit your yellow button.
My yellow button, my yellow button.
You're in.
Okay, and the motion passes to approve the consent calendar with Commissioner Owens abstaining from the minutes of October 2nd and Chair Dominguez abstaining from both the minutes of October 2nd and 16th.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the audience who wish to comment on the consent calendar?
Interesting. Consent calendar draft minutes. Which would you prefer? October 2nd or October 16th first? Let's go out of numerical order, starting with October 2nd. For the report on City Council action, Crystal Landovasco provided a report of the zoning code, which related to signage and commercial establishments in our city. We need to remove those old signage and replace it with the recommendations of this planning commission and adopted by motion of council. Then we go into the approval of minutes for June 5th. Mr. Frometta, second. Mr. Owens absent regarding, I believe it was approval for, scratch that, strike that as they use in the court of law. Let's go back to the director, Schindler. That to inform everyone of the upcoming events of public works departments like Measure S. Soon we will regain the use of our 4 parks. I think a lot of the comment was that, how can we close down 4 parks all at one time and have 4 fire stations close at the same time? People need a place to decompress, and parks provide that decompression. Although I usually go to Los Angeles, where I use my decompression zone before elected officials like Jose Huizar, who brought the FBI on this anniversary night of today. Let's applaud that. Then we go into now October 16th, referring back to Mr. Schindler's report, the meeting for council's extension for existing moratorium for split lots. Well, we just had that conversation earlier. For the record, let my opinion reflect what my statement for the record indicated regarding that on mansionization. Then, regarding PLN 1900-153 special event permit, as you heard from Chair Duarte, but he never said anything. He supported the special events like I did. Memorial Day, Veterans Day, all these special days that we must keep in mind those who actually suffer from major depression or PTSD. God bless America. And then, in closing to that note, it pointed out that Jesus Torres, for the record, forwarded a statement deciding which team of the Rotary Club of the Stonewood Center to create the event on the module smaller scale as to what the Stonewood Center management's offer was for that host site. Well, I'm really not here to encourage or discourage it. Whatever they do on their property, may it be in good standing for us all. And so, at the closing of my time, I reserve the balance of these 20 seconds. Thank you, and good night.
Is there anyone else like to come forward and have a discussion on the consent calendar? Okay. Do we have any new business, or does any commissioner have any business to discuss? Commissioner Spathos.
None, thank you.
Commissioner Frometta.
None.
Previous Chairman Owens.
None, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Vice Chairman Duarte.
None, thank you.
Neither do I. Does the Director of Community Development have any additional comments?
No comment, sir.
We are adjourned.